Heavenly Father, we thank you for your goodness and mercy towards us. We thank you for this new day, for new life, for new hopes, for new dreams. Father, as we honour you through our song, our prayer and our study this morning, we hope that you will find our worship acceptable and pleasing in your sight. Please guide our thoughts and our feelings and help us to honour you in all that we do and all that we say. We ask these blessings in the name of Jesus. Amen. So this morning, I was specifically asked to carry on with the study that we're doing and not do anything mushy. I think that was the word I was told not to do. Not to reminisce and waste the morning away. So I guess that's what we'll do. We're looking at Daniel chapter 8, verse 11. And we looked at 6 pieces of logic. And we're almost down to the end of that information. So we're just going to try up some loose pieces. You'll recall a couple of days ago, I said that there's a brother, I think you may all have heard of him, he's quite well known, Heidi Hikes. And he's done an awful lot of work on Daniel chapter 8. Many people consider him an expert on this chapter, especially the 4 verses that we're dealing with. And he's written 4 books. And they're not minor books, they're 4 pretty substantial books, over probably 200 pages each. And the 4 books deal with 508, 538, 1798, the 1335 prophecy, and also the daily. There's these 4 books. And you remember that I said that I hadn't read his material, but I'd heard about it. And then Sister Tiffany kindly gave me one of the books. She emailed me, she had a copy of it. So I've been busily reading one of his books. It's not the one about the daily, but it's about 508. It's quite interesting. I just wanted to read a couple of things. The reason why it's interesting, we had a discussion a fortnight ago, probably just over a week ago, at the Peck's home on Sabbath afternoon about whether or not we should be studying error or not, or whether we should just study the truth. We talk about if you want to become an expert on counterfeit, you should just look at the genuine and never think about the fake, notes, currency. That people have that kind of imagery. But I found it really interesting how the logic that he uses to address these issues. And I just want to read a couple of statements that he says. I'm not reading them, to have a dig or anything, but just so that you can understand how this person produces a 200-page book and develops arguments like these pretty early on. He said he recognizes the gender oscillation in the book, in these 4 verses in Daniel chapter 8. We make great play of that. He says, he's come to verse 11. I'm just quoting now. This is page 27 from his book. No, sorry, page 5. Page 5 from his book. It's called AD 508 Source Book. That's just the title, AD 508 Source Book, page 5. Yea, he has been regarded as significant in that the Hebrew in Daniel 8 makes a definite gender change from the feminine little horn in verse 9 to the masculine gender he in verse 11. So he doesn't see things the same way we do. And then he says this, however, one should not push this point too far. So obviously we're pushing it too far to make this great case that we're making. Scholars have noted that a dual gender in a noun can be seen elsewhere without significance. The context and the angel's interpretation of verses 23 to 25, Daniel chapter 8, will make clear the power being designated after we analyse verses 11 and 12. So it wasn't going to go into verses 25 and 23 to 25. I wasn't going to analyse them. We've spoken about them before. Just dropping down a bit, he says this. Ellen White. He's going to quote from Paul's writing, 2 Thessalonians, a number of other places. Spirit of Prophecy quote as well. He says Ellen White agrees with Paul, but is at odds with William Miller. She proclaims that which is to be taken out of the way is the papacy at the Lord's second coming, and not paganism. And so he's got a nice little Spirit of Prophecy quote to defend what he's saying. Then he says, therefore the presumptuous power brought to view in verse 11 in the interpretation of verse 25 cannot be pagan Rome. The only logical answer to our question regarding the identity of that power is that it is none other than papal Rome. Uriah Smith has erroneously applied the crucifixion of Christ by pagan Rome to the following clause, and he quotes verse 25. However, neither the context nor the antecedent, which is the thing that happens, the person that's coming before, of the he in the very next clause supports that application. This is verse 25. He's talking about the pronoun he. Then he goes on, and he gives evidence after evidence. It's another nice one. This is on page 9. He says, from nowhere in the entire Bible has anyone been able to produce even one text that says the daily is paganism. Not one. Despite rewards offered for such evidence found in my book, daily source book. The Bible, that's because the Bible nowhere endorses that premise. That interpretation is alien to the Bible and the prophets, and so is its doctrine. With no biblical support, one does not have a biblical doctrine, and one should not advocate it as such. And what other authority could be claimed? When the daily is used in the context of the sanctuary, it is always the work of the priest in the first apartment of the sanctuary. Never was the daily attributed to the work of the priest in the second apartment or to anything else in that context. And he carries on and on. So you can see this person knows what he's talking about when he delves into chapter 8. He knows all of the arguments that we have, and I used to say robustly, he'll pick point by point and show you why we're wrong. He understands everything that we understand. He quotes from many, many different sources. So I'm not saying you have to go into reading his document, but it would be a nice exercise, I think, if we had time to go into his document and show why we disagree with what he's saying, because he makes us look pretty silly. But he has some good points. One of the points he brings out in his understanding of Daniel chapter 8 is that you have to find a priest somewhere in this story. In verse 11, you're required to find a priest when you're talking about the daily. And he's going to quote a number of verses in the book of Leviticus, which are the very same verses that we use to demonstrate what we're talking about. And the other thing he mentions is that the word daily is only used in the context of the first apartment ministry and not the second apartment ministry. So we understand what that means? Yeah? And
the word daily actually on the daily ministration of the priest actually was morning and evening.
Yes, yeah.
So
We've already discussed that point in class, haven't we? Mm-hmm. About it's the morning and evening. Mm-hmm. This is verse 26, verse 14.
But in the light of the sacrificial services,
yes,
it had to be services twice a day, not just a daily thing.
Yes, so he understands the typical and the antitypical, but he's going to make a case that this is Christ in the first apartment in a heavenly sanctuary ministering before the Day of Atonement. That's his point that he's going to make. And he uses a very similar reasoning that we use. Without getting into the intricacies of it, this is part of our discussion about what the Hazon visioning and what the Maria visioning is. And he's picking up this point in his discussion because he's saying whatever the daily is, it has to be in the first apartment ministry of Christ. And we agree with that logic, if you've ever thought about it. Maybe you haven't, because we're saying this, regardless of what the daily is, we're saying from 457 to 1844, we have the daily here. Whatever we're going to think the daily is. And then when you get to the end of this, you get to the Day of Atonement, and then the daily stops after that, in the typical. In the typical, because the Day of Atonement, you come to the end of the year, and and this is the first department, this is the second. There's some differences, and in many ways, I think he's right the way he discusses this thing.
But you have a problem because you have a literal and then you have a spiritual. Because 457 BC before Christ, and then you have Christ. So there's a difference there between the type and the antitype.
Yeah, I'm just talking that, without getting into the intricacies, I think the reason he uses is very similar to our reasoning. That when we talk about the daily, it's in this time period here where we're talking about the first department ministry of a priest, not the second department ministry of a priest. So that's all I wanted to bring up about that point. Let's look, we finished gender, we finished from, we finished sacrifice, we finished grammar, and we want to take a quick look at take away. So let's have a quick look at take away. This word take away in Daniel chapter 8, or in the book of Daniel, the word that's used here is the word rum. We've mentioned this a number of times, and it's found in 4 places in the book of Daniel. Its first usage is Daniel 8:11, then Daniel 11:12, 11:36, and 12:7. So let's go ahead and read those last 3 verses, because we've already read verse 11 already. So could someone read 11:12? Brother Tole. 11:12. Sir? Not there. Brother Arian?
And when he hath taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall cast down many 10,000s. But he shall not be strengthened by him.
So this phrase where it says shall be lifted up, those 4 words in the English, shall be lifted up, that's the same word as take away. Then 11:36.
But it's in the first sentence also.
Sorry?
It's in the first sentence also, when he has taken away.
You just told me, did I miss that?
Yeah, but it's not room.
It's a different word.
It's a different
I
word.
think it's a different word.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, all I'm doing is I'm not taking the phrase take away. I'm looking what the Hebrew word rum is. So I've gone into, it's H73:11, and in that verse it shall be lifted up. 11:36, Brother Jonathan. Whoever's there.
And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. For that
11:36.
what?
That was 11:36, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the phrase where it says, and he shall exalt himself, is the same word. Rum. He shall exalt himself. And 12:7.
And I heard the man close the linen, which was upon the waters and the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven, and swear by him that liveth forever, that it shall be for a time, times and a half. And when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished.
So that phrase where it says, when he held up his right hand, the 4 words, when he held up, that is rum as well. So lifting up your hands, exalting yourself, when your heart is lifted up, all of these are the usage of the word rum.
Brother Parminder, you said that it's 4 times in the book of Daniel, right? Because in the whole Bible it's used, there's 185 verses with that word.
Yeah, just in the book of Daniel, it's 4 times in the book of Daniel.
And then you did notice that Daniel 8:11 and Daniel 11:12, the word rum is repeated twice.
Yes, you've mentioned that already.
Okay.
Yes. Interestingly enough, I think I'm right. I had a look at this. Let me just double check. When you go into, if you've got eSword again, I think you hit into problems with eSword, because if you go into eSword, and I recommended you go to Hebrew Old Testament Plus, HOT Plus, in that Hebrew Old Testament, it doesn't show it twice. It doesn't show it twice. So I was telling a story about a pastor and myself were having a discussion years ago, and he said, why are you using eSword? It's a cheap, 2-bit program, and it's not very effective. and he might have a point at some level. So Esau misses some things. It does miss some things. So it's technically accurate. It's no problem with Esau. But in verse 11, when it says rum, take away, it says rum, and you don't find that on Esau. At least on the Bibles that I've got on Esau.
And also in Daniel 11:12.
Yes.
It's a double
Yeah.
there too.
Yeah. So Sister Tanya's got a good Bible frame. We might want to get the name of that one because it seems to show a lot more than Esau does. So we've said that the word rum is take away, but if you look at the Strong's definition, it means to be high, actively to raise or to rise in a literal or figurative sense. And Brown Driver Briggs says to rise up, to be high, to be lofted, to be exalted, and it's a primitive root. So you can see that this word rum is different to the word sir, which we're just going to have a look at. Just want to go to Ezekiel 45 verse 9. Ezekiel 45 verse 9. This is a nice, I quite like this, the word rum here, how it's used in this verse. Ezekiel 45 verse 9. Could you read that, Sister Tanya, for us?
Thus saith the Lord God, let us suffice you, O princes of Israel. Remove violence and spoil and execute judgment and justice. Take away your exactions from my people, said the Lord God.
This is 45 verse 9, so it was a bit quick. Yeah. So what's happening here? The princes of Israel are doing what they're putting exactions upon God's people. And you know, the way I would kind of imagine this is that they're getting these burdens and they're putting them upon their backs, on the backs of the people. It doesn't literally say like that. Sorry?
Mine says in Hebrew it's expulsions, the word exactions.
Yeah.
It should be expulsions.
So what's the word room in this verse, please?
Take away.
Take away, thank you.
And what does that mean?
I don't know what the word expulsion means.
Okay.
It's like being expelled from school.
Say that again.
It's when you're expelled from school. You have an expulsion.
Oh, expulsion. Is that the expulsion? Sorry, I didn't understand what you. Yeah, expulsion. So expulsion is that you need to, when you're expelled from school. That's a good way. So you can see that there's some exactions that are being placed upon God's people, and it's kind of like these taskmasters, these heavy burdens upon people's backs, and to take something off that, you have to lift it off them. So that I like the use that it's in there. And we won't read this one, but in Hosea 11:4, it picks up the same concept, the same word, take away. But here it says take off the yoke. And you can imagine how you would take a yoke off something, an animal. It has to be lifted off. Hosea 11:4.
Hosea, not Isaiah, right?
Hosea 11:4. It says take off the yoke. And the way you take off a yoke, you have to lift it up. So it can be used in these various ways. But in the book of Daniel, it's used specifically in those three places, in Daniel 11 and Daniel 12, as some kind of exaltation, except obviously in Christ when he's lifting up his hands. So that gives us the idea of what it means in verse 11. It doesn't mean to take away and throw away. Heidi Hikes knows this, and he comes to a different conclusion than we come to. Let's look at the word sir. The word sir is going to be used in 11:31. So we'll read 11:31. Brother Henry, are you there? 11:31? Whoever's there.
An arm shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate.
So the reason we pick up verse 31 and we use that a lot is because it connects the daily with the taking away, as it does in chapter 8 verse 11. But this takeaway, as we know, is a different takeaway. And you see the same use in Daniel chapter 9. So Daniel chapter 9, if someone can read verse 5, and then someone read verse 11. So it's got three usages in the book of Daniel.
Daniel chapter?
I'll say it again. Sir has got three uses: Daniel 9:5, Daniel 9:11, and Daniel 11:31. We've just read 11:31 because that's the connecting verse with 8:11 because it has the daily being taken away. But verse 9, in chapter 9, verses 5 and 11, they have a different connotation. So I'm read chapter 5 and chapter 11. Verse 5, verse 11.
Verse 5, we have sinned and have committed iniquity and have done wickedly and have rebelled, even by departing from thy precepts and from thy judgments.
So that word departing is going out of the way. You know, you're on a path and you're departing, or you're in a room and you've left the room. So that's how Sir is used in that verse. It's something that you were at a place and now you've left that place. You're on a path or you've left that path. It's some kind of moving away from a position. And verse 11.
Yea, all Israel have transgressed the law even by departing, that they might not obey thy voice. Therefore the curse is poured upon us, and the oath that is written in the law of Moses, the servant of God, because we have sinned against him.
So again, a very similar verse, and the same word departing is used here to use that word for that word sir. And the word sir, Strong says to turn off, literally or figuratively. Brown Driver Briggs says to turn aside or depart. So you can see that's exactly how it's used in the book of Daniel, to turn aside or depart, or to turn off, literally or figuratively. Now, when we were looking at these four verses, we've got, back to chapter 8, we've got verse 9, 10, 11 and 12. And we've got pagan, papal, pagan and papal. And you remember that I said this is a chiastic structure. And Sister Tiffany corrected me and she said this is not a chiastic structure, because chiastic structures work on the principle that if you have, I'll do it this way vertically, if you have AB, then you'd have BA. Yeah. And I thought, oh, okay, this doesn't do that. So I admitted at the time, maybe we shouldn't call it chiastic structures, but then I said, okay, I'm going to call it a pattern. So now I'm going to give you the technical name for what this is, because it has got a technical name, and it's called a synthesis. So this is syncretism, and it's a valid use of language. Many people use this, just as they use chiasms, and they use it in secular work and in biblical work. It's used to drive a point home to you, and synthesis does the same thing, but it's a slightly different usage. So we've got a name that this is a synthesis. So I hope you're happy with that, Sister Tiffany. I've given you the name. This is a synthesis. I never heard of it before, but that's what it is. But there is also a chiastic structure in this. There's a chiastic structure in this as well. Sister Alison, you said something.
No, it's fine.
Okay. So this.
I have a definition.
Please, yes.
If you like Wikipedia.
I like Wikipedia. Yeah, let's use Wikipedia. Let's use.
Synthesis is a rhetorical technique wherein words are intentionally scattered to create bewilderment by disrupting the normal course of a sentence. It forces the audience to consider the meaning of the words and the relationship between them.
Okay, now isn't that exactly what we say with this gender oscillation? It scatters you, and it forces you to think about why this is happening. But Brother Hikes, with many other theologians, recognise this syncretism. They may not call it that, but they just say it's irrelevant. It doesn't mean anything. So, and it says it's a form of rhetoric. Yeah. So I like that anyway. There were a number of key points that that was good. But I think there's a chiastic structure in this as well. This is just broadly speaking. In verse 9, you see pagan Rome exalting himself. So he's going to exalt himself. And I haven't thought through this totally, but he exalts himself. I'm going to use the word horizontal. Because he's pushing and exalting himself against nation states. Then when you come to the papacy is going to exalt himself to heaven, it says. And then verse 11, when you switch over to pagan Rome, there's an exaltation to Jesus. And I'm saying, let me put, not heaven, I'll put vertical. It'd mean the same thing. And I'm going to suggest that Jesus is also a vertical exaltation. And then verse 12, the papacy is going to exalt itself when it starts dealing with the daily. And this is again dealing with nation states, the Visigoth. So I think you can see a nice chiastic structure here as well.
Why do you say pagan Rome exalts itself vertical?
Because it's going to make war with Christ.
Oh, okay.
Because it's going to make war with Christ.
Can you repeat the last one, please? It exalts itself with horizontal.
You should know the history.
Yeah, I do, but I like what you're saying better.
The papacy, what's it doing in there? It's going to receive arms to make war against the daily. This is the Visigoths, 508.
Thank you.
So this is this horizontal exaltation. So you can see a nice chiastic structure there. So it's got a synthesis and a chiastic structure in those 4 verses. And
Why is it vertical? Persecuting Christ is a vertical thing because he was on earth.
I knew you were going to say that. I knew you were going to say that he was on earth.
Because what he represented heaven.
That's what he represents. He represents
God in
heaven.
flesh. Jesus never stopped being God.
Okay, so that's all I want to say about patterns. Giving you the name. We've looked at the word take away. So this word take away is different to the word sir, and that's why we say whatever verse 11 is teaching, it can't be the same truth that 1131 is teaching. So in the last class, we started looking at from pagan Rome, the daily was taken away. And we said this daily is the continual. And then we made an argument that went something like this. If this is the line of Daniel chapter 8, if I put it to scale-ish, this is pagan Rome. So I'm putting pagan Rome from 168 BC to 538 AD. Without getting into a discussion why that, we've spoken about this before, and I'm not trying to make any we could put 158 or 31, but the point I wanted to make was that the pagan Rome only has limited existence, but this word is the continual, and the very definition of the continual means that it's in existence forever, or it's been around forever. So this is the daily. So the first thing we noted was that whatever the daily is, it can't be pagan Rome. The daily can't be pagan Rome. They're 2 separate things, because this whole verse is about possession. Pagan Rome owns the daily at this moment in history where this verse is dealing with, but it's going to be taken away from him. And if the daily was a continual, then the daily was in existence, had a pre-existence, had a present existence, and will have a future existence. So it's alive throughout this history. And just in the context of chapter 8, we know that this is the Medes and the Persians, and this is Greece. So this is a quick review of what we spoke about. And then we have the papacy here. So that should all make sense, because that's just a quick review of what we discussed last time. We went into a bit more detail, but we looked at it and we went through it a bit more thoroughly. But that was the gist of what we've said. And we could restructure this sentence. We'd say the daily was taken away from pagan Rome. And so hence, the daily is not pagan Rome. It's something else. And when it's taken away, it's lifted up or exalted. And as we're going to go through this, hopefully really quickly, that I want us to, hopefully we're going to see that in this, let me rewrite this sentence. I'm not going to rewrite, I'm just going to add a bit. From pagan Rome, the daily was taken away, and I want to add this clause in, by a priest. And so this priest that I want to put in here, when I mean the same, I don't mean the same person, but conceptually, I want to put a priest in here, just as Brother Hikes wants to do. He wants to put a priest in this verse as well, and so do I. But the priest he's going to find is in the words itself. So the only priest that you're ever going to find in verse 11 is Jesus. So that's why he's going to switch this verse round in the way that we've already spoken about. But he has much more sophisticated arguments than just the way the Hebrew and the English go around. He's going to put verses and spirit prophecy quotes to defend his position. But he wants to do the same thing that we want to do. You need to find a priest in this story. Otherwise, it really doesn't make any sense. And his priest is Jesus, but our priest is someone else. So if you take this timeline, it's obvious who this priest is, because pagan Rome owns the daily in this history here. But the daily was in existence before this. So the first thing we must know is that these powers must have owned the daily. They must have had possession of the daily before pagan Rome did. And then when pagan Rome's going to come off the scene, this daily that he owns is going to be lifted off from him, and the person who lifts it off is a priest. And then the priest is going to do something with it. So you can quickly see that what we're inferring is that the priest of verse 11 is not Christ, but the papacy. Can we see the reasoning or the logic for that?
So, would you mind repeating why it has to be a priest?
Because of the whole context or the cultic language, the backdrop of chapter 8. Everything, what he's going to do, and he does a much better job than I can do in a short class like this, is that he's going to take certain words and phrases that are used in verse 11 and see how they're used elsewhere in the Bible. And the way they're used is always in terms of a sacrificial service, and any kind of sacrificial system has to have a priest attached to it. He recognises that there's a ram, there's a goat, he recognises there's a cleansing of the sanctuary. Everything about this chapter is all dealing with the sanctuary system. He recognises that, and so does Peter's. But they'll tell you in this book, I didn't get to the page where it says, he says, we disagree with Peter's conclusion. They've read his document, they know exactly what he says, but they disagree with his conclusions of how he breaks down these verses. So can we see why we're identifying that there has to be a priest here, and the only person that this priest can be, from the way this vision is structured, has to be the papacy.
I don't understand why it has to be the papacy.
Because if we're going to say that we're in this history here, the whole point of this chapter, from at least up to verse 12, if you want to say the vision goes from verse 3 to verse 12, it goes further than that, then this is talking about 4 nations. And pagan Rome owns this daily. hopefully we're going to see, maybe it's premature to say it has to be that. Hopefully we're going to see that the whole symbology that's brought to view here is a false sacrificial system. So you'd have a false priest or an anti-priest or an antichrist.
Which is the Pope, which makes sense.
Which, yeah. So maybe it's premature to say it's obvious. So let's go to the book of Leviticus.
Short question.
Yes?
Why could it not be a priest from pagan Rome? Why is it necessary that it's a priest from the papacy?
Sensitively?
Because it's a church.
Because it's a church. Just without even thinking about the history, just thinking about the role playing that you have here. You have the papacy is a church, it's a false priest.
Well, paganism's a church.
Yeah, that's what his logic is. I like Sister Tiffany's logic. There are a number of lines of truth that are being brought to view here. There's this cultic viewpoint, but there's also a rise and fall of nations. So you can see in verse 9, if you went to verse 5, so verse 5 is going to show you how you go from Medo-Persia to Greece, and then verse 9 is going to show you how you go from Greece to pagan Rome. And I would think you'd need to find somewhere in these verses that tell you how you go from pagan Rome to papacy. And I think it's verse 11. It doesn't give the full story, but verse 11 shows this transfer that's going on from pagan to papacy. Brother Michael.
This is why you switch the word by, not switch, no, this is why we understand the word by to mean from, because it's saying from pagan Rome the daily was taken away and lifted up and exalted by the power that takes it away.
Yes.
Okay.
And the power that takes it away, that lifts up and exalts it, is offering a sacrifice because of the context of the verses.
Yes. It has to be this power because this is the only one that would do that. Because whatever pagan Rome has, it's not going to be anything that's good. It has to be something bad. So it has to, whoever this power is has to be someone who's bad. But your argument is, why is it not pagan Rome? Then you'd have this internal struggle about pagan Rome is going to be warring against itself, which I understand. I think I understand part of your logic is that you're talking about the division of Rome and how it breaks down. Brother Coleth.
Are you saying verse 11 is a papacy?
No. Verse 11, from him. Where?
It's a transition.
Which, this line? I'm saying it's the transition from pagan Rome to papal Rome. That's what verse 11 is teaching us two things. First of all, it exalts itself to Christ, and then it's going to show you the switch, the transfer from pagan to papal. Brother Michael.
Can I read it just so you...
Oh, sorry, had you finished your point?
No, I just want to add something else.
Yeah.
The couple of arguments I've heard was that because you said Harry Hike says verse 11 is a papacy.
Everybody does.
Okay, then, everyone. And I think they use verse 25.
And he uses verse 25 as well. Yeah, I quoted verse 25. Yeah.
To prove it because of the word magnified. Then he shall magnify himself in his heart, and basically describes the papacy. So pagan Rome magnifies in verse 11, but in verse 25, it's the papacy magnifying, and their argument is, well, here the angels come to explain what's going on, and the angels giving us an explanation, and we're not accepting it.
825 is pagan Rome still, right?
I wasn't going to delve into verse 25 because we won't have time to deal with it. But that's the argument that they're using. There's more than one argument that they're going to bring forth. They're going to bring forth the exaltation, his heart, and by peace he shall destroy many, and broken without hands. So there's many lines, there's many symbols that they'll use to defend why they say it's the papacy in verse 25, which then goes on to verse 11. we're not going to have time to cover that in class, unfortunately.
I just want to read verse 11 so that I can just make sure I'm understanding the way you're understanding it. It says, "Yea, pagan Rome magnified himself even against Christ, and from pagan Rome the daily was taken away or lifted up and exalted by the papacy, and the place of pagan Rome's sanctuary was cast down."
Yeah.
Okay. That's it.
Leviticus. Well, for the speed of time, I'll probably read the verses. So I just want to get closure on this verse in the next 45 minutes. Chapter 2, verse 9. Let me just write down the verses. 2, 9, 6, 15. These are all from Leviticus. And 4, 8, 10 and 19. 8, 10, 19. These are all taken from Leviticus. The reason I split them that way is because they're two types of offerings. This one's flour. And this one is animal. We'll read the verses. 2:9. And the priest shall take from the meat offering a memorial thereof, and shall burn it upon the altar. It is an offering made by fire, of a sweet savour unto the Lord. This word shall take is rum. So we're going to find all of these verses are dealing with rum. So there's a rum here. And the priest is doing this. The priest is taking away. So this is where we begin to make the connection in chapter 8, verse 11, that you need to have a priest to do all of this work for you. So a priest is going to take away from the meat offering a memorial thereof, and shall burn it upon the altar. It is an offering made by fire, a sweet savour unto the Lord. 6:15. And he shall take of it his handful of the flour of the meat offering, and of the oil thereof, and all the frankincense which is upon the meat offering, and shall burn it upon the altar for a sweet savour, even the memorial of it unto the Lord. So again, the context of this is a flour offering. So the priest is doing this. He says, and he shall take. This is rum again. So the priest is going to take from this offering a portion. He's going to cut it away from it. He's going to take it away, separate it, and it's going to be two things. He's going to burn it upon the altar, and then it will turn into a sweet savour. So it becomes an offering that he's given to God. So whatever is being taken away, which in this case is flour, he's going to take a memorial or a portion of this offering, burn it, and when it's burnt, this smoke is going to be offered to God. So the relationship between takeaway and the priest and the burnt offering and the sweet savour are all connected together. So this is where we're headed. We're going to see that pagan Rome is a sacrifice. So there was this whole heap of flour, and then from that flour a portion of it is cut off or taken away, and when it's taken away it's going to be burnt, and it's going to be burnt and offered to God by a priest. And that's what we're going to see here. From pagan Rome, something is cut away, it's lifted up and exalted by a priest to God. So that's how we're reading the same verse, but we're reading it from a sanctuary perspective now, a different perspective. So we're saying that from the offering or the sacrifice, a portion of it is taken away or cut off, is burnt upon the altar, and is exalted or offered by the priest to God. So we're picking up all of those phrases.
You've chose room in these ones to use that to tie it in, but throughout the Bible, when you're seeing room all these times, is the offering always given in this 3-step process: cut, burned, offered? Is room always doing that, or not always? And I don't care if you don't answer now.
I don't know.
Okay,
I
go
can't
for
say
it.
because I haven't looked at it in enough detail to say that.
Okay.
Let's go to Leviticus chapter 4.
I just have a quick question.
Yes.
Can you just say the 3 dates of verse 11 so I can just on my notes? 31 AD against the Prince of the Host. Is it 538 or 508 that you're marking?
I'll deal with that in a minute.
Okay.
Let's go to Leviticus 4, verse 8. And he shall take off from it all the fat of the bullock for the sin offering, the fat that covereth the inwards, and all the fat that is upon the inwards. So now what you're going to see, we're switching from flour to animal. And it says in verse 8, he shall take off from it. So you're going to have an animal sacrifice, and he's going to room, where it says, and he shall take, he's going to room something from it. And it tells you what he's going to room. All the fat of the bullock. And the fat of the bullock is going to be a sin offering. So when it's talking about room here, the thing that's going to be roomed is the fat. Verse 10, we'll drop down to verse 10. As it was taken off from the bullock of the sacrifice of peace offerings, and the priest shall burn them upon the altar of the burnt offering. So it's just talking about 2 different types of offering. This one is a peace offering. So I think it says like it was done with the peace offering, and verse 8 tells you it's a sin offering. And then verse 19, it's the same thing, it's going to say, and he shall take all of his fat from him and burn it upon the altar. So what this is teaching is this, that you have this animal and you have a knife. You sacrifice the animal, so the animal is killed. And then you open the animal up and you separate the fat from the rest of the animal. So what you're going to be left with is the fat on one side, then you're going to be left, and it tells you quite explicitly in this, when you read through the chapter, you're going to be left with the animal, which is its carcass, with its skin, and all its internal organs. And there's explicit instructions that all of this is going to be taken out of the camp and burnt separately. So there's a separation process between the fat and this animal. So the whole animal gets burnt outside the camp because it's not an offering to the Lord. And this fat, which is roomed from this animal, is first cut away from it. In fact, when you look in detail at this, what happens is it says first the fat is seared, it's separated from the animal. So let me write it this way. Talking about fat, first the fat is seared from the animal.
It's room first and then it's served. Verse 8.
Yeah, I don't mean the way how it approaches in the verse, but I'm saying this is what the priest must do. He must first kill the animal, drain its blood, open its belly up, and take all the fat out. So there's going to be a separation process between the fat and the animal. And then the second stage is the fat is burnt and offered.
I disagree that it's because the word take away.
Oh no, it says the word sir in the verse. In the verses, yeah.
Which verse? Mine it says in verse, sir, it's in verse 9, and he shall take away.
People are going to ask me these technical questions.
in verse
Perhaps
8.
you should present your logic first,
Yeah,
and then
let
we
him
can
go back and check it out so we
Yeah.
can hear the logic.
Yeah, let me do that because it's easier.
Yeah.
It is correct. So the fat is then burnt and offered, and when it's burnt and offered, it's lifted up to the Lord as an offering. So this is this context of rum. So a careful study of this, you'll see that the fat is surged from the animal, it's taken away. But the point that we want to pick up is that this fat, once it's separated, is the thing that's being offered to the Lord. It's burnt on an altar, and then the sweet savour is what God likes. He enjoys that offering that's being offered to it. So you have 5 verses that all tell you the same thing, that from something, and in this context, it's just flour, is cut off from flour. But it's really the clearest way is to see it with the animal sacrifices, that there's a separation between the fat and the animal. And when you take this imagery and bring it into this story, what you see is this. So this is addressing the question that Brother Jonathan was saying, was how do we know who is whom? So I'm saying this, that pagan Rome is the animal. And it's a sacrifice. So pagan Rome is going to be sacrificed, and he's going to be sacrificed to offer something to God, to Satan. And the thing that's going to be offered is the daily, which is the fat. So the papacy is going to have pagan Rome killed. In fact, he's going to kill pagan Rome. He's going to then separate the fat from the sacrifice, and then he's going to get this fat and he's going to burn it on the altar of burnt offerings, burnt sacrifice, and then he's going to offer it to God. So this here is the fat is lifted up and it's offered. I'll put it up here, offered to Satan. And the conclusion that we've come to is exactly the same conclusion that Brother Hikes comes to. The only difference is who the priest is and how you develop that argument. And it starts right from the beginning where he says, let's not make too much about this gender oscillation, this synthesis, because it doesn't really matter that much. And he uses that argument from I think it's William Shear that makes this argument, or it's Gerhard Fandel that makes this argument. But they're all aware of all of these issues. So,
Short question: is the difference between the flower offering and the animal offering was just the same concerning the animal?
I think it's clearest to see when you do with the animal, but the principle would be the same. But when you look at the animal, it's different body parts. So you can see that something is really cut away from it, because otherwise I'd just have flour and we'd say it's the same thing. But the principle is the same, that you get a memorial or a portion of this offering and it's burnt and then it's offered to God. Just as this is. And
There's different types of sacrifices
yes, yeah.
for different purposes.
But I think he was asking if we put flour in here, would it still work? And it would still work. Yeah, as opposed to, I don't think he was asking what type of sacrifice it is. But it's really clear to see here that the fat is separated from pagan Rome. So, what I'm suggesting is happening here. If we go to 1131, we see almost the same language being used, where arms shall stand on his part, they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and they shall take away the daily. But that taking away, as we know, is sur, not rum. And we've marked in Daniel 11:31, where it says that the daily is taken away, is 508. And this is the same as verse 11 in chapter 12. Both of these verses do the same thing. And in fact, Daniel chapter 8 verse 12 says the same. But here, this taking away is different. And once again, they understand the logic that we're using, but and they fight against it. It all comes down to who you're going to choose as this priest. So what I'm suggesting is this, that from this sacrifice, the fat is cut away and then exalted by the papacy, and that begins in 330 AD. So I'm going to put it here. The daily is taken away in 330 AD. And then the next part of the verse, the last part of the verse, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down, is in connection with this phrase, that the daily is taken away, because now it's going to give the historical context of when that happened and what happened. So we know that in 321, so we'd be back around, somewhere around here. This would be 321 AD. In 321 AD, Constantine makes a Sunday law. And as soon as he makes that Sunday law, he's crossed a red line. I don't know if that's a good way to use it in Bible terminology. He's closed his probation basically for his nation. And now the 4 trumpets are going to start blowing upon pagan Rome. He realizes what's going to happen, not consciously, and he's going to move his capital from the city of Rome to Constantinople in the year 330 AD. And when he does that move, the papacy is going to fill that vacuum that he's left. And that's what that last part of the verse is teaching. It says, and the place, the city of Rome, of his sanctuary, the Pantheon, was cast down by Constantine in the year 330 AD. When we understand that history, and again, Heidi Hikes doesn't agree with any of that reasoning, and he has a logic to suggest why he doesn't agree with that. But when we see what's happening in this story, then we go to Revelation chapter 13 verse 2. And Revelation 13 verse 2, it says that the dragon power of chapter 12 gives to the beast power of Revelation 13 verse 1 and 2 3 things. It gives power, it gives seat, and it gives authority. So let's put that here. And we mark this as 496, 330, and 533. And I'm tending now to put 533-4 because of the 4-volume law book that Justinian has written in this time period. He starts in 33 and it's all done in by the next year. And this is the taking down of the Visigoths. This is where the papacy is given state sponsorship and he has religious authority. in the year 533 to 34. The seat that's being mentioned here, the way I explain it is that this seat is a throne. And the throne has a crown attached to it. And this throne that's being given or relinquished by pagan Rome, by the dragon, to the beast, is this event here in 330 AD. Heidi Hikes disagrees with that understanding of this verse, and he gives you a Spirit of Prophecy quote to show you why he disagrees with it. But as in all things, and I think we saw this on Sabbath, you read a Spirit of Prophecy quote and it looks really straightforward on the surface until you start really thinking about it. And I was going to say some, but many of her key passages that we use are not that straightforward. And people argue over it. And when we talk about them, we just casually browse through them. We say, oh, we know what this verse means. It means this because it agrees with what we're saying. But other people read these verses in a different way. And there's a verse where she virtually quotes Revelation 13 verse 2, and she takes you to 538. She takes you to 538. Let me see if I can quickly find that, because it's a nice little passage that...
William Miller took it there.
Sorry?
William Miller put the great authority at 538.
Yes, yeah, we were speaking about that on Sabbath. Was it, Brother Ty? Yeah, we were speaking about it on Sabbath, how he looks at that. Let me see if I can quickly find it. I probably won't be able to.
Your argument anyway.
Nothing derails our arguments. We're set. Question. Why did you say that? Well, I shouldn't. I shouldn't
it was 508 or 538. I don't understand why it would derail the argument.
I'm going to give the reference. This is... Ellen White, Great Controversy, page 54. Great Controversy, page 54. I think it's 54. Brother Hike says this: is it true that the same event is referred to in Revelation 13 verse 2? And the event I think he's talking about, he's talking about 330 AD. Turning to inspiration, we have this quote from Ellen White. So now he's going to read from Ellen White. In the 6th century, the papacy had become firmly established. Do you understand what 6th century means?
Sorry, what page? 500 something.
Page 54. I'm pretty sure it's page 54.
It is page 54.
Yeah. The 6th century is when you do it's the 500s. Yeah. Some people. In the 6th century, the papacy had become firmly established. Its seat of power was fixed in the imperial city. So you can see where she's picking up this word seat. And the Bishop of Rome had declared to be the head over the entire church. Paganism had given place to the papacy. The dragon had given to the beast his power, his seat, and great authority. Revelation 13 verse 2, she quotes it. And now began the 1260. And he's going to italicize and now began the 1260 of papal oppression foretold in the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation. And then he's going to say this: when did the 1260 years of papal oppression begin? 330 AD or 538? Of course 538, hence another error by Smith.
That's got nothing to do with it though. He was all power seat and great authority was finished at 538.
It's all about how you read the verses.
Yeah.
So we're going to read this, that there's this progression that's going on, and then we're going to read into her statement. By the time you get to the 6th century, all of these things have been given it, and now you've come to the end. But he's going to say it doesn't read that way. He's going to read it that these things happen then and there.
And you can read it his way.
Can
Yeah.
you?
Yo, totally.
What's the sentence again? Would you read that one sentence on the
Yeah.
I can't read
Reading
You don't have
his statement
to,
or,
right.
or Ellen White's statement.
Her statement that he's arguing.
In the 6th century, the papacy had become firmly established. Its seat of power was fixed in the imperial city, and the Bishop of Rome was declared to be the head over the entire church. paganism had given place to the papacy. The dragon had given to the beast his power and his seat and great authority. And now began the 1260 years of papal oppression foretold in the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation.
The way that he's reading it, and he's wrong, but or I believe he's wrong. The way that he's reading it, he's saying that all of this took place in the 6th century.
You'd have to prove that then.
But yeah,
I think he would. I'm going to go through, but he's going to go. I think he's going to demonstrate all of that.
Because he's reading it in the 6th century. Its seat was fixed. And in the 6th century, the dragon gave him the seat, power, and authority. And now, in the 6th century, began the 1260. So he's saying all of it happens in the 6th century.
Yeah, it's the thing that he doesn't see that we see is progression. Yeah. We factor in this 200 years between 330 and 530. This 200 years where we're going to see the rise and fall of two nations, and he doesn't want anything to do with that. And I'm not suggesting that he's saying everything happens in 538. He may have a bit of progression in there, but he's not going to go further back than the 6th century.
He contradicts himself. He's got a little pamphlet where he talks about Emperor Theodosius banning paganism, and that was in 400 and some, I think it was 490 or something like that. I can't remember the exact date, but it's 400 and something, the Emperor Theodosius, and he argues this is why 508 can't be taken away the daily. You got to do it from Theodosius's decree when he bans paganism, one of the Caesars or the emperors. And now Ellen White's saying here, this is where paganism was taken away and given place to the papacy. The paganism had given place to the papacy in the 6th century, so he's using it, but it's still kind of contradicting down the road. And another thing is, so what? Even if all of these things happen in the 6th century, what does it do for his argument? How does it help him? Is what I'm trying to figure out.
He's trying to poke holes in Uriah Smith's argument, so
needs to destroy Uriah Smith's
so
understanding.
So it's just character defamation.
And if you do that, you can change what it says.
Not doing nothing for his argument.
I don't want to get character down. I don't want to get character defamation about him. But I think he's just trying to pull to pieces his arguments.
That's what he says at the end. He says in another point of why Uriah Smith is wrong.
Yeah.
Because he needs to, because he has a different view of Daniel 8, so he needs to go and disprove all of Uriah Smith's arguments so that he can get out of his understanding of Daniel 8. Because he disagrees with them. So, I mean, what he's doing is logical from that perspective.
It's exactly what we did.
It's exactly what we do. He's going to go systematically through the arguments and break them all down.
Brother Arya.
Maybe you said it, but I missed it, I think. What's your difference between the seat, because you have seat and then you draw a nice chair, and then you have authority and you draw a throne.
No, sorry, that was that.
Oh, okay.
I'm saying the seat is the throne.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
So the seat is the throne.
Like that. Oh,
yeah. So when it comes back into chapter 8, verse 11, it says the place, the city of Rome, which was the place of his sanctuary, was cast down. It was given up by pagan Rome in the year 330 AD. Everybody agrees with that. That was the event that happened, but its prophetic significance is where we disagree. So I'm tying up 13 verse 2 into the last part of Daniel chapter 8 verse 11. The place of his sanctuary is cast down. And what I'm suggesting is that this fat that is taken off and offered to their God is this crown here. This is the fat. This is this deity that's used here. And that crown is the title of the King of the North. And the King of the North, we already said that the daily is a woman. We've already discussed that, even though it was very briefly, because you see that the daily is nation hopping, and nation hopping is an image that you get in Revelation 17 when the woman sits on the heads of the beast. But it also has a different symbology, because the title for the King of the North is going to get transferred over. You have the King of the North here. That's clear to see in Scripture. Median Persians, I don't have the verse on the forefront of my mind, is also called the king of Babylon. When they take over from the Babylonians, they receive the title for the king of Babylon. And if it takes the title of the king of Babylon, it must be the king of the north. Daniel 11 teaches that Greece is the king of the north. And then the whole story of Daniel 11 is the transfer of this title from one power to another. So, in the context of verse 11, I'm seeing that we're seeing the transfer of the title for the king of the north in the year 330 AD. So 330 AD, the daily is lifted up and exalted to Satan, and it's the year where the city of Rome is cast away by pagan Rome, and what's actually being transferred from this power to this power is the title for the king of the north. Now, I'm not trying to undo the whole concept of what's being exalted is not paganism, because we see this religious element running right through this story. Okay.
It answered to my question earlier. Then the dates are when he magnifies himself against the prince of the host, 31 AD, and then the rest of it takes place in the year 330.
Yeah.
The transfer of the title of the king.
It's the transfer of the title of the king of the north that's occurring, and it's occurring 330 in preparation for it finally for the papacy finally to take control of everything. There's this setting up period that needs to occur for all these empires when they take the title and they finally rule supremely. And you can see it explicitly for these two nations. I've not gone back and looked at the history about these two when that happens here. Brother Aaron.
You say 330 there, but you draw a line to 496?
No, to 330.
I'm not a good artist.
Oh really?
This is I look at people's notes and I think I didn't say that, and now I realise why I've got all these problems, because people are drawing things and they're reading all these things. I'm thinking, oh, how do you read that?
So the crown is not 496?
No, the fourth crown is not 496. That is very bad. Dear me, I'm sorry. Thank you for pointing that out.
Does placing 330 as the taking away of the daily, at least in this context, affect our understanding of 508 to 538 as being the setting up? Because I guess at this level you would be saying the setting up goes from 330 to 538 still, I guess. So does that affect the logic at all?
For me it doesn't, and we ran out of time when we were looking at chapter 11 to discuss all those setting ups, and we've got maybe let's run how many we've got. I'm suggesting there's this one, 330 to 538. We definitely know we've got a 508 to 538. We've got a
93.
493 we want to put? Yeah, 493 to 538. We've got a 533 to 538. Any others?
Are you saying these are all parallel? You can write
I'm saying
it and
they're
do
all
it like
parallel.
that. Okay.
They're all teaching us a different truth that we need to understand and overlay them. The start dates might not be the same. Some might be 1989, some might be 1911, some might even be Midnight Cry.
Okay.
But they're all teaching us something about a setting up.
So you can quick title it, 330 title, just like a one-word title real quick, so we can go check it out and see if we agree.
Oh, so yeah, I'm suggesting this is the King of the North. Is that what you mean by title?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, just go
King of
through.
the
What are
North.
you titling each of these setting ups?
This is the daily. 493 is the three horns. I'll put the horns down. And 533 to 538 is religious. I'll put law, yeah, religious law.
Thank you.
And I'm not sure, historically, this is a nation, but so is this. So I don't know how it's fulfillment how we see it, but you've got these four, and they're all setting up. They're all taking us to Sunday law, that's for sure. But their start dates might be slightly different, but they're all teaching us a unique, different truth. One thing that Tyler and I were talking about on Sabbath is, well, I was saying that he didn't agree. He just listened. So I don't want to blame him if this is wrong. In Daniel chapter 8, verse 9, this is when pagan Rome's going to rise. It says the south, I'll put the glorious land, but it says the pleasant land, and the east. This is 31, 63, and 64. These are all BC dates. And I know that some people put 65. I think Smith put 65 here, but that was my Wikipedia days, so I put 64. Either way, it's not in sequential order. But when we go to Daniel 11, verse 40 to 45, that's a parallel. We've got the king of the south, the glorious land, and we've got Egypt. And that is in sequential order. So I'll put not sequential and sequential. So there's a difference between these two. And what I'm saying is that the antitype or the antitypical fulfillment of what's happening, or this is the first and this is the last, that this is actually in sequential, is in the correct order. It actually happens sequentially in that way. We should be able to go into this history, the power, seat and authority, and say if we have power, seat and authority, historically it's not in order. And I think its antitypical fulfillment probably, or should be, in sequential order. And then I was musing on what those events would be, and this is what my hunch is. I think people may or may not agree with it. It may even be in the public domain. If I put 1984 to 1989, this is when the United States gives its power to the papacy. This is verse 40, Daniel 11 verse 40. The chariots and many horses. This is the military power that is going to be used to propel the papacy to rise up. Then it's going to have its seat, and I think the seat is the Sunday law. And then it's going to have religious authority, and that religious authority is when it's going to rule the...
Rule the 1 hour?
Yes. So I'll put the UN, or we could put the world, where the whole world is collapsing, and you can see that in the history there. The whole world is collapsing around Justinian, and he's going to sort out this problem, and he's going to make the papacy, the ruler, have this religious authority. And as soon as he does that, as soon as that happens in that history, we saw that between 533 and 538, there's an attack upon the Sabbath that's going on. Everybody is forced to be Catholic on pain of banishment and confiscation of all your property and all your goods. So,
do you have any thoughts on why those couple of verses aren't chronological?
no. There must be a reason.
It always throws
It's teaching us something.
It's so much easier.
Yeah.
Maybe he's telling us that we don't need to think in man's wisdom.
I don't know, yeah. There's so many thoughts I've had about this, but I'm not sure. So, in summary, verse 11 in chapter 8 is teaching us that once pagan Rome begins to exalt itself vertically towards Christ, it's now going to begin to be brought down. And this bringing down is through the transfer of the title of the King of the North. This is the thing that's going to get taken off his head and be lifted up from his head to the papacy's head. So he's going to receive this crown or this title of the King of the North. In the cultic language, it's defined as the separation of the fat from the sacrifice, which is offered as a sweet-smelling savour to Satan by a false priest. So everything in this verse is in agreement with what people teach when they talk about Christ's ministration, but it's totally upside down. It's all a satanic version of the truth. We could what I'll try and do when I get back home is I've got a little table of this, and I'll upload it so you can pick it up from the internet in the note section, that you can line up those verses that I've rubbed out from Leviticus. I've got Leviticus 4:8, 4:10, 4:19, 2:9 and 6:15, all of those 5 passages, and you can line them all up with Daniel 8:11. So you'll see a room going through all of them, and then you'll see the word from, this word from, you'll see how it's connected to the word room, how this thing is lifted off from this, and you'll see how it's done continually, because this is a continual sacrifice. And what else are we going to see? And then we're going to see that in all of those passages that there's a priest that does this work, and he's going to lift up this fat or this memorial offering from this cultic beast of pagan Rome. And we didn't go into it in detail, but the reason you can make pagan Rome, which is a little horn, into a symbolic animal is by its connection to the goat of verse 5 to 8. Down to chapter 8, verses 5 to 8 talks about the he-goat, which is Greece, and it says, from out of one of them came forth a little horn. So this coming out of this goat, I don't want to confuse our minds, I'm not saying Rome comes out of Greece. We understand it's from one of the directions of the 4 winds, but because there's this connection of it coming out from it, you can see that if that was a cultic beast, that there's a symbology or this connection that this is also a symbolic beast, even though it's only identified as a horn power and not an animal in and of itself. We've looked at all the passages that deal with the daily, except the last one, which is verse 13, when it talks about these 2 desolating powers that come against the host and the sanctuary. And I guess we've come full circle, because this is almost where we started when we're dealing with the Hazon vision and the Moreh vision. And I think there's still much more that we need to discuss about the Hazon and the Moreh vision. But one thing that I wanted us to just put in your memory banks when you're dealing with the Hazon vision and the Moreh vision is not to forget the link. I mean, we're not going to have time to read this, but I just want to make sure that I have discussed this, but maybe it slipped our minds. Because the Hazon vision is intricately connected to the daily and the transgression of desolation in verse 13, these 2 desolating powers. We know how that works with respect to the 2520, we know how it works with respect to 2300 days, but there's a connection in chapter 9, verse 21, where you need to take account of the Hazon vision. Because I've said in a few places that the vision in chapter 8 goes from verse 3 to verse 12, which takes you to 1798. And then you have verse 13 and 14, and 14 takes you here, which is 1844, as we all know. But in 921, and this verse 13 is Gabriel and Christ speaking. 921 says this, "Yea, whilst I was speaking in prayer, even the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the Hazon vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, touched me about the time of the evening oblation." So if you go back to chapter 8, you're going to see Gabriel here in verse 13. And it tells you really clearly in 921 that Gabriel is seen in this vision here, in the Hazon vision. And without turning to it, in your studies, when you're looking at this, also factor in Habakkuk chapter 2. Because Habakkuk chapter 2 talks about the vision, and it talks about the tarrying of the vision. And we know the whole backdrop of what the tarrying of the vision is dealing with. It's dealing with the spring of 1844, and it's dealing with the Hazon vision. So, our time's up, and what can we say but farewell? I hope you've enjoyed the classes. I hope people who are online have enjoyed the classes. I've enjoyed myself. There's so much more we wanted to say, so much more I wanted to say. I wanted to spend a lot more time in the book of Daniel chapter 2 and start breaking that down, but unfortunately time has taken over from us, and we've just run out of time. And it's taken over, taken away. Let's close with prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your loving kindness and your goodness towards us. Lord, as we open your word and we see how easy it is to become confused or distracted or make a misapplication of your word, we ask and pray, Lord, that you would guide us. May we have pure hearts and clean hands, Father, because we know that unless we serve you faithfully, that we can't hear the Holy Spirit speaking to us and directing us in the right way. Father, it's so easy to take the words of other men who we admire, who we like, who we're friends with, and trust them. And in the same breath, Lord, discard other men who we don't have a relationship with, who have upset us, who we don't like. And Father, we know that this is not the basis on which to take a position upon your word. We need to each study for ourselves. And Father, if there's one thing that I want to pray for my brothers and sisters here, is to understand that by beholding, we become changed. And the beholding of these prophecies, this Hazon vision that you've given to us, is the very mechanism that you've provided to change us. Lord, help us not to see that this is a means to an end, but a study of your word is the end. It's where we meet Christ. Please be with us and protect us for the rest of this day. Give us travelling mercies. Father, for those of us who are remaining and working, may you protect us from harm. And may we praise you and glorify you in all that we do and all that we say. We ask these things in the name of Jesus. Amen.